Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. Infamous here with Battle of the Build. Hope you guys are having a great day. It's been a long weekend. Coming back, just looking over the PTS patch note changes for 5.2.2. Not a whole lot going on with the current PTS changes. They did make some few changes that were released. Say some pretty good changes in terms of some of the characters. I think the biggest change was for the Warden, as well as between Warden, as well as between I wouldn't say not as much so DK, but between Warden and Templar. Some of the biggest PvP related changes were between Warden and Templar. But starting off, of course, with going over DK. Well, let's actually look over here. Fix an issue where sprinting would not remove invisibility from your character. Fix an issue where your stamina bar became desynced if you were pulled or CC'd while sprinting. This is kind of like some decent changes. It fixed an issue where Bastion and other sources of unique bonuses could increase all character effectiveness while meeting their requirement. So I guess these are all some like quality of life changes. Quality of life changes, especially for ESO, quality of life changes are always welcome. For DK, for Combustion, it says this passive no longer has a cooldown in order to help the Dragon Knight sustain itself. Since it doesn't have a class-based dedicated resource ability, such as Dark Exchange or Siphoning Strikes. And I would say that the unfortunate thing is that they're still going in this route where DK is like the only class that unfortunately gets forced into running a trait that they don't want. Typically, I don't think anybody really runs the charged trait. You might have some very niche build where you might run charge. I don't know why they're going in this route, because the combustion passive is garbage. It's one of the shittiest passives that DK has. I should say it's one of the shittiest resource passives in the game, which is why you keep seeing them make these kind of like big changes where before it was like had a 5-second cooldown, then it has 2-second cooldown, then we just fucking totally remove the cooldown. And it's just realistically, it's a shitty passive, primarily because one, if the person, for example, if you're fighting like a DK, if you're fighting like another DK who is a Dark Elf, you can't proc the Combustion because Combustion passive procs on whenever you deal burning damage, right? And so if you're a Dark Elf, right, if you're a Dark Elf, the Dark Elf passives don't allow you to take flame damage. You look at some of the Dark Elf passives, you'll see the flame resistance right here. It says you gain immunity to the burning status effect. And so basically you can't proc Combustion on anybody who's running a Dark Elf. The second thing is that it's based off of the damage. So if, for example, you're fighting like another Nightblade, whether it's a Magicka Nightblade or a Stamina Nightblade, you don't proc Combustion because they don't really take a lot of dot damage because Cloak suppresses dots, and so since it suppresses dots, it suppresses the burning dot, which of course then means you don't get Combustion. And then on top of that, if you're fighting, for example, like either a Stamplar or a Magplar, same thing, your dots just get cleansed, which means it reduces the overall effectiveness of your major source of regen. And since Battle Roar got nerfed to shit, I don't understand why they keep going this route. They really just need to rework the Combustion passive so that it's just a straight regen passive and not this passive that requires you to run a charged weapon, because if you run a charged weapon, as you can see right here, if you were to change over to a charged weapon, look at it right here, charged weapon, it increases the chance to apply status effects by X%. And of course, single target status effects, single target abilities, for example, like Searing Strike, have a higher chance of proccing the burning status effect than, for example, engulfing or talons, for that matter. Or, for example, what's it called? Oh my god, thinking of the banner, right? So in terms of the abilities that Magicka DK has, because AoE abilities have a reduced chance of proccing the status effects, and that's just the way the game works. And so it's a really pointless change, which is why you keep seeing them making these very dramatic changes while every other class gets both regen, right? You think of the Nightblade kit has just straight regen, the Warden kit straight regen, as well as region when they heal. Whereas for some reason they just refuse, giving Dragon Knights this very convoluted way of where they're restoring, especially in light of the fact that they nerfed the shit out of Battle Roar a very long time ago, and have trying to supplement the way that DKs for especially Magicka DKs, because Magicka DKs don't have any inherent reduction, whereas stamina DKs do have reduction. They do gain reduction to any ability that causes poison damage, which is namely both of their 2 dots that they rotate to. Whereas Magicka DK doesn't have any innate cost reduction, but because stamina abilities are by nature 15% cheaper than Magicka abilities, and then on top of that, Magicka DK gains an additional 25% because of the secondary portion of their passive. They gain an additional 25% reduction to all of their poison damage effects, and you can see that right here. It's it says increase, actually right here. Where are we? There we go. World and Ruins. It says decreases the cost of your stamina poison abilities. So that would basically be both of your 2 dots are ridiculously cheap. This is even on I think on a heavy armor build. It's pretty cheap. So some of the other changes that were of note was the engulfing change, and this was just so that people don't have to run the minimum of 3,300 spell damage to achieve the maximum of 10%. So they included it so that Max Magicka will also now affect the amount of percent increase to engulfing. Searing Heat did get a change. They did increase the damage from the passive from 10%, which is what it is on live, to 33%. Of course, that's just to make that's just to make DK dots, because it is the dot class. So that's just basically changed to help them to stand out a little more, which was a good change. It was a much needed change, definitely. The other thing that did change was they fixed an issue where rank 2 of this ability was applying its damage to all Ardent Flame abilities rather than the ones listed. And the ones listed are basically engulfing or noxious, venomous, or what's it called, burning embers, and then of course the other one that is standard. So on live, you're actually gaining an extra 10% to your whip, and an extra 10% to Flames of Oblivion, and an extra 10% to Fiery Grip. So with the next patch, you're gonna see where your whip, where basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3 abilities are actually going to be nerfed by 10%, because I guess there is some bug where they were being increased by an additional 10%. So I guess that's going to be fixed for the next patch. The other thing that did change, of course, was the change to Stonefist. I know a lot of people don't like it. It's kind of like a pointless discussion, because anybody who animation cancels, you're not going to see the animation to Stonefist, and it actually provides a fair amount of damage. The other thing, of course, is that you're not really realistically going to be able to utilize something like Stonefist for the CC, because even though they've reduced it from 5 down to 3, when you need an immediate form of crowd control, for example, if you get gap close, or if you get attacked by a Nightblade from stealth, and you get hit with an incap, and you take a lot of burst damage, and you need that immediate crowd control, you're not going to have it. You're not going to be able to sit there and rotate 3 Stonefist range attacks on the person, because they're just going to end up dodge rolling or etc. So it's kind of a pointless change to, like, even though it's better, it's still pointless, right? Because you're still going to have a CC on your bar for dealing with people immediately. Also because it's very obvious, for example, when the person knows that they're able to get stunned, all they're going to do is either block the Stonefist or just dodge roll the third one to avoid the crowd control effect. And of course, Fossilize is still the best CC that a DK has access to. Even though they did increase the amount of cost for it, it's still manageable. I use it on my medium armored build, and it works out just fine. I switched over from Dizzy to Wrecking Blow on that build. Link will be in the description, so if you guys want to take a look at some gameplay, I've played extensively with it. It works out just fine. The other thing that did change was they did up the damage, which I guess is nice. It's like, hey, why not? I mean, I would have much rather them kept the extra mitigation, or given you access maybe to like minor protection or something, because you are a stand your ground build, and originally the Stonefist morph gave you the minor buffs to your minor physical and spell resistance, and of course you basically lost that. So it kind of is what it is. The extra damage is welcome. I guess we'll have to see how it plays out on live. The other thing is that you are going to take damage from all sources. So for anybody, I mean, I guess if anybody's running dots, you have to keep in mind that all of those dots are going to take an extra. They're going to do an extra 45 per stack of stagger that you have on you. There wasn't a mention if they changed the amount of stacks. I believe it was five stacks. Oh, excuse me, here it is. The maximum stacks and be cried will be 3. So it's 45, so that's 90, 135 extra damage per I guess you say per whatever damage that you take, right? So if you have a couple of dots on you and etc. So that damage is actually going to add up. We'll have to see how it plays out over the patch. The other thing that was thankfully changed, which was an obvious change that was going to come, was the change to Backlash. Since Backlash could crit with this patch, especially with the reduction of all of the dot damage, which was more than welcome. I mean, this patch in terms of dealing with dot damage is very overbearing. Thankfully, they reduced all of the dots, but also is because people could just load you up and then some random Templar would hit you with the power of the light and it would just proc immediately, because you just take so much passive damage from dots. Even when you're LOSing, you take, and especially power of the light hits hard as fuck. So this was an obvious change where it says this ability is morph now only store damage dealt from the caster, and this is how it should have been. And I know that there are going to be many people who are going to complain. And this is kind of what happens when you give people these broken abilities for so long, and then you nerf them to make them balanced, and then people are like, you just nerfed me, like, what, you know, people just feel, you know, some type of way because they rightfully get nerfed. And this is why you don't introduce broken abilities. This is why you don't do that, because the only thing that's going to happen is that all the Templars, you know, everybody's going to post in the forums, you know, all the Templars are going to band together and complain, when realistically this ability should never have worked that way to begin with, because it dealt entirely too much damage on most. Even in no CP, it's got like an 18k tooltip. It's really not that hard, especially when you're in a BG, to get focused down by a Templar. On top of that, Stamplars and Magplars have access to very strong executes. So on top of that, when you're eating, you know, I don't know how many times where I've gotten like 6-7k power of the lights, and of course it can't be dodge rolled and it can't be blocked. You just basically just eat the damage and pray you can heal through it. Thankfully this changed, especially in light of the fact that it can now crit. This was another obvious change that was going to happen, because they increased permafrost to 12 seconds. They increased sleet storm for what it is on lies to 12 seconds. So they thankfully reduced the ensnare by 15% to ensure that it functions. They reduced the damage done of this morph by 15% to ensure that this morph functions primarily as a utility. So the one that stuns is going to have its damage reduced by 50%. Which is good, because if you look at the amount of damage that it did on live, it's like around 5k. If you got like 4k, weapon damage, you know, taking a look, you can see it here. It's got like a 49 change tooltip, so it does entirely too much damage, especially because it got increased from 8 seconds up to 12 seconds. So in essence, got a 50% increase in the amount of duration, which of course is a 50% increase in the amount of damage that it does over the course of the entire alt, which, so it's obvious that they were going to reduce it to basically bring it in line to what it is on live right now. The other thing that kind of sucks for Mag Warden was the change to Northern Storm, where it just automatically gave you the 8%, and then of course they changed it kind of so that it kind of acts like Dawnbreaker, where it gives you 15%, you know, fully ranked up, you're going to get an additional 15% to your max magicka. And of course this is for the duration of 30 seconds, which is a fairly good amount of time when you think about it. If you're running shimmering, you're typically pulling around 6 alt per second. So in essence, you know, if it's giving you a 30-second buff, you're typically getting around 6%, as long as you can keep up shimmering, you're basically going to have the buff almost 100% of the time, even without securing kills, just because of the amount of extra ult that Wardens can get. The good thing about it is that it no longer requires you, because basically if you ran this morph, you basically ran it on both of your bars so that you didn't have this huge swing in your maximum magicka. At least that's how I ran it, because when I would switch to my back bar, like the additional 9%, especially because most of the time you're running like inner light, so it would be like a huge swing in the amount of max magicka that you'd get. So I typically run it on both bars. This allows you to back bar it without a problem, and then just basically utilize the buff kind of like you would with a Dawnbreaker. The other thing that thankfully changed was the onslaught. Onslaught got a decent nerf. The upfront portion of it is irrelevant. When it fully ranks up, it still does the exact amount of armor penetration. The amount of penetration to your resistances by 100%. The only thing that thankfully did happen is the duration, which got lowered from 9 seconds down to 5 seconds. And this morph no longer ranks up. Steadfast Hero got a nerf. I think it was a little bit of a nerf. The set works really well on live. It has basically a 5 second uptime with a 5 second downtime, because the downtime is 10 seconds, but it lasts 5 seconds. I think 15 seconds would have been the sweet spot to make it fairly useful, but now it has a 15-second downtime. But if they're going to reduce the amount of time on things like major protection, then of course they should also do that for things like vitality from the Black Rose staff, as well as the dual wield. You can get also major protection with a very high uptime as well as from utilizing those two sets. So it's like, if you're going to nerf it here, then you kind of have to balance it on some of the other builds that are very capable. And that's basically kind of the gist of the patch. Wasn't really all that great. I was kind of disappointed. I was hoping to see in terms of what really needs to be seen for the Necromancer class, without fail, like without discussion, Blast Bones non-targetable, period, right? Full stop. That should have happened when it first came out and they saw how buggy it was. That should have been the first immediate fix, was to make a change to Blast Bones. The other thing that I wish that they would have changed as well is looking at the Necromancer class is, for example, taking a look at some abilities that are not utilized by the Necromancer class, which is basically the dots, right? Necromancer lacks a good dot between Detonating Siphon as well as Mystic Siphon. Basically, after having, which I've said numerous times in numerous videos, that the easier thing that they could do is have the Necromancer, the Blighted Blast Bones goes out, it hits, and of course you can then detonate that corpse via obviously Detonating Siphon or Mystic Siphon, and it basically does AoE dot damage that sticks to its target. So this doesn't necessarily affect PvE, and what you would basically do is you would treat it just like, for example, Breath of Life. Breath of Life is 180 degrees in front of you, so it will only hit somebody who is in front of them, and you can't heal people who are behind you. And you would basically do the exact same thing for this ability, so that you're not targeting corpses that are behind you. It only targets corpses that are within 180 degrees in front of you. And then of course you still have to utilize the reticle to basically point at the corpse, so that it basically will target that corpse and then explode that corpse for either disease damage over time or dealing shock damage. And this basically gives, especially the Magicka Necromancer, a little bit of extra damage, because with the extra shock damage to the opponent, you have the ability to proc concussion, and of course concussion will then give you an extra 8% damage. And Magicka Necromancers, like I said in my previous video, link will be in the description, that it does need a slight buff outside of just the fixes to the pathing and making Blast Bones more reliable. One thing that they could give them is, of course, like I said before, giving them access to Mystic Siphon, or making the Skeletal Arcanist more single target and more viable, and of course maybe giving it either the Minor Breach or you could give both. Like if both of these abilities were very viable, and you got Minor Breach here, and you had the ability to make real use of Mystic Siphon in PvP, it would really push Magicka Necromancer into a stronger position, because right now it's basically the weakest of the Magicka. It's basically the weakest of the Magicka classes that you can play in PvP. And so hopefully that this is something that we'll see, you know, in the very near future before the patch drops, that we'll see maybe some of these changes to, like I said before, with being able to detonate Mystic Siphon. It basically use the exact same animation as Silvara Scales. Take Silvara Scales, the animation, it literally does that. Do the exact same thing with the electrical one, except it's blue. It gives you like this blue puff of shock damage or whatever. And that's basically would make this ability very useful for the Necromancer, and of course pushing them up so that they're able to deal a little bit more damage, especially because the Colossus got nerfed for the coming patch. I think that's basically it for this discussion. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Of course, if this is your first time checking me out, be sure to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on future content. Thanks for watching. Take care.